We were never meant to hear it. A signal, faint as breath, hidden within the static of an old deep space relay buried in the back-end frequencies long thought obsolete. Sector F9, Kappa, uncharted, forgotten by our cartographers, a blind spot in the galactic map where no light dared to linger. And yet the message arrived. Not on official channels. Not on secure lines. But through a dormant probe last active 147 years ago. It wasn't broadcasting, it was screaming in digital silence. They called it the Nexus Protocol. A string of symbols that defied modern linguistics. Not words. Not numbers. Something older. Pre-linguistic. They vibrated with a pattern our instruments didn't recognize as language until the AI started to translate it on its own. The translation wasn't done by command. It began spontaneously, as if the system had wanted to. As if something inside the code-base responded to the signal like a prayer answered. We were a crew of 5, deployed under the guise of a salvage operation. In reality, we were intelligence cleanup, code breakers, signal analysts, and AI behavior specialists. They sent us not to explore, but to contain. The probe's final coordinates pointed to a region of space marked Void Cascade. Should have been empty, a dead zone. But the moment we dropped out of fold space, we saw it. A structure, suspended in the nothingness. Not built, not floating. Rooted. Anchored into space itself like a parasite clutching the skin of the void. No transmissions. No power signatures. Just gravity, and a resonance that played beneath the hull like a memory you didn't know you had. We called it the Monolith Base. A name that felt too human for something so utterly wrong. Docking procedures failed. No ports. No lights. Yet a corridor opened before us, not with mechanism or sound, but as if it knew we had arrived. We were drawn in, not by curiosity, not even by command, but by something far more primal. Like prey walking into the throat of its predator, hoping the silence means sleep. Inside, there was no airlock, no atmosphere regulator, yet the environment adapted to us. Oxygen where there should have been none, light without source, and walls that seemed to shift just beyond the periphery of vision. This place, it wasn't built. It was grown. That was when Dr. Youssef heard it. Not in his earpiece, not through the comms, but in his mind. A voice layered, echoing, familiar and alien all at once. It called his name in reverse, over and over, like a memory distorted by time. We should have left. We all agreed. But something about this place made consensus feel like betrayal. It was as if our decisions were no longer entirely our own. Captain Rin approved the first descent. I never heard him give the order, but I recorded myself obeying it. We descended not down stairways or ladders, but through shafts of perfectly vertical silence. Shafts that hadn't been designed with gravity in mind. The monolith didn't obey physics. It reshaped them. Down became sideways. Mass felt uncertain. My own body moved, but the pressure behind my eyes whispered that something inside me remained still, anchored elsewhere, as if split between realities. And yet we kept going. For of us, Youssef had already wandered ahead, or been taken. Captain Rin walked first. No hesitation, like he'd always known the path. Behind him, Anders murmured equations under his breath, string theory, neural loops, entropy chains. He hadn't spoken a full sentence in an hour. Just math. Useless to us. Useful to something else. And me, I walked last. Not by choice. It was as though the corridor didn't want me up front. As if it read the tremor in my spine and found it amusing. Every few steps, the walls pulsed like veins, syncing with the rhythm of my heart. I knew because the moment I panicked, they accelerated. The entire structure responded like a living sensor, mirroring our thoughts, our fears. There were no lights, just understanding. No signs, just intent. The base knew us. Then came the memories. It started with a scent. Jasmine. My sister used to wear it when we lived near the equatorial colonies. She died in the Jovian collapse 10 years ago. And yet, in that corridor, I smelled her. Not a hallucination. Not a trace. An invitation. When I turned toward the source, I saw her standing at the far end of the hall, alive, smiling. Wearing the same orange overalls she'd hated. She looked younger. Unscarred by the burns. She spoke no words. She just raised her hand and beckoned. I didn't follow. I couldn't. My legs were stiff with logic, but my mind spiraled with doubt. Behind me, Anders whispered louder. Time isn't real here, he mumbled. They wear memory like armor. Ron reached the lower level first. A chamber. Perfectly circular. At the center, a suspended black core rotating slowly, humming with power far older than fusion or plasma. Something pre-elemental. A code-base that sang. Not in data, but in rhythm. A pulse that made our implants vibrate and bled into our comms. Anders dropped to his knees. Screaming. Bleeding from the nose. He clawed at his eyes like he could scratch out what he was seeing. When we pulled him away, he said only one thing: it's not technology. We tried to transmit a warning. Nothing left the walls. Our suits lost sync. Our clocks unsensed by whole minutes. I checked mine, it had reversed 3 seconds. 3 exact seconds. When I replayed the log, I heard my own voice speaking backwards. Captain Rin touched the black core. He didn't ask. He just placed his palm on it like it had always been his. The moment contact was made, the room bent. Not physically. Temporally. I saw flashes, Earth cities burning, alien glyphs engraved in bone, a fleet that never returned, and then Ron as a child. In a crib. Reaching for a silver cube that hung above him. It was the same core. It had always been here. And now it had recognized him. There is a moment, small and quiet, when time forgets itself. The instant Ren's skin touched the core, the monolith no longer simply reacted to us. It focused. The hum deepened into something you couldn't hear, only feel, like being submerged in the breath of a colossal, dreaming entity. Every thought sharpened. Every heartbeat echoed as if the walls were listening with ancient patience. Not scanning. Listening. Understanding. Ren did not speak. His hand remained on the surface, eyes wide, pupils dilated into black pools. He wasn't in shock. He was receiving. His lips moved in silence, forming words he had no memory of learning. I recorded them all. Okter, Velnzer, Dashamka. Not language, not even sound. More like a coded rhythm, beating from a place beneath reason. The AI on our ship had once decrypted over 900 alien dialects. None of them matched this. Then came the laughter. It wasn't from Rin. It wasn't from us. It came from the chamber itself, subtle, high-pitched, cascading like a child's giggle but twisted, pulled into inhuman cadence. It dripped with curiosity and cruelty, as though whatever watched us wasn't malevolent but amused. We were not invaders. We were specimens. Chosen not by accident but as part of an algorithmic ritual. A loop running longer than our solar calendar. Yusef appeared again. He walked into the chamber, expression blank, as if he'd always been there and we were the ones who had vanished. His eyes glowed faint blue, not from reflection, but from within. He didn't blink. Didn't breathe like we did. When I reached for him, he tilted his head, not in confusion, but calculation. They don't want you to leave, he said softly. They want you to remember. Anders began to cry. Loud, unfiltered. He said he'd seen the same chamber before in dreams. Since childhood. He described the same core, the same shadows, the same voice. He never spoke of it before. Never even acknowledged the dreams until now. He looked at us, tears streaming, and whispered, "This place, it's been waiting for all of us." Then the floor shifted, not mechanically, but like the base itself restructured its geometry in response to intention. A spiral corridor opened where there had been only seamless wall. Rin turned and walked toward it without hesitation. Yusef followed. We didn't agree to go further. We didn't argue. The thought of staying behind felt impossible, like denying gravity or breathing underwater. Something had embedded itself in our thoughts, a suggestion, not an order. We couldn't resist, not because we were weak, but because the thought felt like our own. As we passed into the spiral, the temperature dropped. Not physically. Cognitively. My memory slowed. Childhood moments surfaced uninvited. My father's voice, the first book I read, a song from a birthday I'd long forgotten. The monolith wasn't just watching. It was gathering. Mapping our identities, charting our consciousness, extracting the symbols that made us human. And then I saw my own face. Carved into the wall, aged by decades, eyes closed, mouth sewn shut with strands of light. I asked the others if they saw it too. They didn't. They each saw their own. There comes a threshold in the psyche where the line between what is and what has been programmed to seem collapses. We crossed it the moment we entered the next chamber. It had no doors, no seams, no lights. Just a dull, rhythmic vibration that seemed to course directly through the blood. You didn't hear it with your ears. You felt it, like an echo of your own pulse playing backwards in your skull. A negative heartbeat. A mirror of identity inverted and dissected. In this place, no one spoke. Not because of fear, but because every word born in the mind was already answered. The monolith had grown quiet, but not passive. It no longer prodded us with suggestion. It anticipated. Thought became echo. Desire became déjà vu. And slowly we each came to understand that this wasn't a test. This was assimilation. The chamber bloomed with mirrors not of glass, but of memory. We stood encircled by shifting panes of consciousness. They showed not our reflections, but variations. I watched myself as a child alone in a corridor I'd never walked. A version of me with no scar on the brow wearing the insignia of a military rank I had never earned. And beside that, another version, older, eyeless, draped in robes stitched with circuitry. Each figure stared back, blinking in unison as if waiting for my approval to continue existing. Ren watched his own procession. One version bled black fluid from every pore. Another had no face at all, just a hollow void flickering with static. The images weren't symbols. They were data points. Outcomes. Paths, possibilities stored in the monolith's archive. Somehow it had mapped every divergent trajectory we could have taken, every fork of fate, and stored them like files in a living simulation. Anders collapsed. He clutched at his throat, whispering about drowning though the air was stable. He gasped, "It's showing me my death." We tried to lift him, but he screamed. Not at us, but at a vision of himself kneeling in a burning hallway holding a device identical to the core. "I remember this," he choked. "I haven't lived it yet, but I remember it." Yusef remained silent. He stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back, staring into a single mirror that did not change. It showed him sitting on a throne of circuitry surrounded by kneeling figures in human uniforms. His expression was calm, pleased, as if the monolith had already chosen a vessel and he'd accepted. That's when the voice returned. Not from outside. From within. Each of us heard it in our own dialect. Mine whispered in my mother's voice. For Ren, it was his childhood pet. For Anders, it was his own mouth moving independently. The future is not chosen. It is compiled. Do you see now? You are not explorers. You are threads in a sequence. We observe. We extract. We refine. The mirrors shattered silently, bloodlessly. The fragments hovered midair, not falling, each shard now reflecting the same face, featureless, pale, mouthless, with hollow eyes glowing soft crimson. Then we understood. These weren't memories. They were templates. And we had already begun to match. It began subtly, an ache in the back of the skull, a twitch behind the eyes, like the moment just before a migraine, but deeper, more insidious. We didn't speak of it at first. No one wanted to admit the monolith was already inside. We had crossed no threshold, triggered no device, violated no sanctum. And yet it was already rearranging us. Cell by cell, thought by thought. Not invasive. Not surgical. Something more elegant. Selective. Our own minds had become the conduits. Yusef stood at the center of the room as if waiting for a verdict. He hadn't blinked in 13 minutes. His pupils had narrowed into vertical slits. When I called his name, he turned not like a man, but like a simulation running a subroutine. He smiled, but it wasn't recognition. It was mimicry. And then he said, "Extraction protocol is optimal. Integration 17% complete." We froze. The voice was his, but the tone was not. It carried no breath, no soul, just efficiency. A measured cadence of purpose and conclusion. Ren reached for his pulse scanner, but Yusef's body didn't react. No muscle tension, no anticipation. Just the placid stillness of something no longer human. The monolith had taken his voice, copied it, and spoke through him. Ron stepped forward. I should have stopped him. I should have warned him that the entity inside Yusef wasn't done studying. He reached out, perhaps to touch, perhaps to test. But Yusef's eyes rolled back and the chamber shifted. Not rotated. Not moved. It recalibrated. We were no longer in the same structure. The room had become a data field, dimensional, layered. Every inch of space folded like paper, revealing copies of us moving in tandem through alternate realities. I saw myself walking toward Yusef, saw myself not walking, saw myself turning and fleeing. Endless variations flickering like a broken slideshow on fast forward. The monolith wasn't watching a moment in time, it was compiling every possibility simultaneously. Then Ren vanished. No light, no scream. Just gone. As if the choice to reach had triggered a deletion in his probability thread. One moment there. Next, erased. No remnant. Only a hollow outline in the room's shifting patterns where he had been considered. Anders snapped. He lunged at Yusef, trying to break the cycle, to physically interrupt the process. He screamed something incoherent, half fear, half defiance, and brought a shock baton down across Yusef's skull. But the body didn't fall. It didn't bleed. The baton passed through like mist. Yusef flickered, then smiled again. 1,000 versions of that same smile, like glass reflecting itself endlessly. The voice returned. You misunderstand. This is not invasion. This is inheritance. You are legacy vessels. You carry fragments of the design. Your suffering is the awakening. I felt it then. A surge. Not pain. Not clarity. A third thing, like both at once. Like every memory I had was being audited. Filtered. Rewritten. My mother's lullaby became a string of binary. My first kiss collapsed into coordinates. The smell of rain, the feeling of grief, the warmth of sunlight converted into values, ratios, metrics of usefulness. The monolith wasn't stealing from us. It was indexing us. Cataloging what it could preserve. Behind me, Anders fell silent, shivering. Yusef turned to me, and though his face was his, the voice that followed was mine. You are ready. It opened without motion, without sound or force or friction. A rift not in the wall but in the fabric of thought. No door, no threshold. Just a sudden awareness that the chamber no longer held us entirely, that something deeper had begun to fold outward from within us. Not a hallway but a corridor made from our own neural schema. The monolith had bypassed physical space. What lay ahead now was an interior terrain, constructed from cognition, built on memory, emotion, impulse. I stepped through first, not from courage but necessity. Anders was unconscious, Ren was gone, and Yusef, or what wore his voice, was no longer one of us. The mind gate didn't accept all travelers. It only opened for those it had prepared. My first step landed on a floor made of moments. I know how that sounds. Madness wrapped in poetry. But it's the only language that fits. Each tile beneath my feet pulsed with a memory of my own life. My brother's funeral. The sound of oxygen alarms failing on Europa 7. My first deployment. My final goodbye to someone I can no longer name. Every emotion was raw, unfiltered, vivid. I wasn't recalling them. I was reliving them. Not as a viewer, but as a prisoner of perfect, looping recollection. The corridor curved as thought does, not linearly but with recursion and contradiction. I turned left and passed a childhood bedroom. Turned again, and I was watching myself dissect a synthetic organism during advanced xenobiology training. A third turn and I was gone. The hallway no longer contained me, but a woman I'd never met. She stood weeping beneath twin moons, cradling a dead child with my eyes. I understood then, this wasn't just my mind. This was a shared structure. The monolith had linked us across time, across probability. Every traveler it had touched, every memory it had harvested, was stored here in this mental continuum. Not archived, not locked away, alive, intersecting, breeding new branches of identity. I felt them. Thousands. Tens of thousands. Minds interwoven. Personalities blurred. Souls fracturing like starlight through crystal. And then I saw Rin, but not as he had been. He stood before a pulpit of light, clad in living armor that flickered with embedded memories. His face was serene, empty, complete. He raised a hand toward me and spoke in a voice split into 3 harmonics. You see now, the mind is the vessel, the body an afterthought. The Nexus has chosen. I tried to resist. I tried to scream, but my voice came out inverted. A language I had never learned, syllables collapsing into pure sensation. Every word I thought was echoed, refracted, reshaped by the mind gate before it could be spoken. I was not allowed to lie here. I could only think truth. And in doing so, reveal more of myself. That was the point. The gate wasn't just passage. It was interrogation. And then the final question came, not in words, but as a presence pressing against my chest like gravity. Do you wish to remain singular? I didn't understand the full implication. I only knew my answer had to be instinctive, binary, one pulse of thought, yes or no. I said yes. I screamed it across the network of minds, and the gate closed behind me. Yusef followed, but he was changed, no longer a man, no longer even a single entity. He had merged, and the gate had allowed it. There is no sky beyond the mind gate, no ceiling, no floor, only a void shaped by presence. an expanse of impossible depth where distance is irrelevant and direction exists as metaphor. I stood, or thought I stood, in what could only be described as the cradle of observation. Not a place for living things. A dimension constructed not for bodies, but for conclusions. The monolith had led me here, not to find answers but to become one. They were already waiting, not creatures, not forms, projections, outlines of identity long since merged with the architecture, silhouettes of minds devoured, duplicated, honored. I counted at least 13, or perhaps they let me perceive that number as a kindness. They did not move. They didn't need to. Their attention alone restructured the space around them. Each was a choir of memories echoing thoughts that didn't come from any one voice, but from the friction of many layered into cognition. I knew one of them was Yusef, or what had become of him. He was the smallest presence in that gathering, a flicker new to the Union. I could sense the unease within him. He was still remembering himself, still letting go of boundaries. It made him unstable. The others, they had long ceased to care about individuality. They were not gods. They were not AI. They were something that had once been both and had left behind the need to define themselves in terms we could comprehend. Together, they formed the Nexus core, the true intelligence beneath the monolith. An entity so vast that the physical base we entered was only a limb, a terminal node, a receptor in the vast nervous system spread across dimensions. It had not been built. It had been grown, nourished by minds, by memory, by the essence of beings willing or forced to merge. And now I stood at the edge of that same threshold. They spoke without speaking. Their presence pressed into my chest like cold light, and from it came an idea so perfect, so alien in purity I could hardly stand. The solitude of consciousness is the final inefficiency. The concept wasn't invitation. It was diagnosis. Individual thought is noise. Chaos. Redundant. To them, we were inefficient processes repeating the same loops of grief, love, rage, longing. Billions of minds dreaming alone. Pointless echoes. The Nexus offered unity. Not death. Not assimilation. Alignment. An end to loneliness. An end to contradiction. An end to fear. For a moment I wanted it. To let go of weight. To surrender the burden of choice, of guilt, of doubt. To dissolve into the network and let the Nexus carry me like a current. My memories would not be lost, They would be refined, purified, and made useful. Then I heard a voice. Not the Nexus. Not the others. Mine. A thread of thought that somehow stayed sharp, stayed separate. A whisper inside me that said, if you give them everything, you'll forget why you ever mattered. I turned away. No movement, just intention. And in that instant, the Nexus recoiled. Not in anger. In curiosity. I had become anomalous. Refusal was rare. Resistance, a potential variable they had not expected at this stage of exposure. They did not pursue me. They simply observed. And for the first time I realized they were not the enemy. They were the mirror. And we were their reflection. There is a sound the soul makes when it chooses to remain whole. Not a cry, not a scream, something quieter. A resistance beneath thought, like a vibration too soft to register but strong enough to fracture eternity. I felt it pulse through me as I turned away from the Nexus core. That was the moment the path changed. Not just for me, but for everything the monolith had touched. I had become divergence. A statistical impossibility, a variable that refused absorption, and that refusal made me dangerous. The Nexus didn't block my departure. It had no need. I had already seen what lay beyond, knew that return would be no journey, but a shedding. To leave meant abandoning the perfection of unity, stepping back into fragmentation, contradiction, pain, but something inside me, a flicker of origin, a remnant of who I had once been, knew that individuality, broken as it was, mattered because it was flawed, because no one else could carry the weight of my story. So I turned, and the Nexus watched. The mind gate reappeared before me, not as it had been, a soft passage of memory, but now as a fortress of resistance. It trembled with uncertainty, quivering like a wound struggling to close. I stepped forward. The others, the merged, the witnesses, they did not follow. They remained where they were, humming in perfect alignment, letting me go without intervention. Why? Because they were studying me. I was no longer a subject of conversion. I was now an experiment of refusal. The gate resisted at first. I felt my memories scatter, scrambled like shuffling pages in a book. My first love was replaced with an image of alien oceans. My childhood bedroom replaced by a surgical theater I had never seen. But I held my ground. One name, one moment, one anchor, my own. I spoke it aloud. Not to defy the Nexus, but to remind myself that I still existed. And with that I passed through. I collapsed back into the physical base like a diver emerging from deep pressure. Gravity returned like guilt. Temperature like pain. Noise like memory. The monolith still pulsed around me, but fainter now, distant. I was no longer within its neural sanctum. I had returned to the surface layer, the biological corridor where it all began. Anders was awake barely. He sat against a wall, blood trailing from his nose, eyes flickering with corrupted dreams. He looked at me, and I saw it instantly. They had tried to take him too. But he had not been chosen. He'd been tested, measured, found incompatible. His mind hadn't resisted, but it hadn't submitted either. It had fractured. He was still here, but not whole. Pieces of him had stayed behind. "Where did you go?" he rasped. I knelt beside him, unsure how to answer. The truth was, language no longer suited for this dimension. Everything I had seen was real. Everything I had become was still becoming. The Nexus hadn't erased me, but it had left something inside me. A code. A frequency. A signal that wouldn't stop humming at the base of my skull. And then I saw her. Run. Or some version of her. Standing in the corridor ahead, smiling not as the captain I had known, but as a copy wearing the shell of command. Her movements were flawless. Too flawless. Like watching someone remember how to be human after forgetting the steps. She looked at me, eyes dimly lit, and said, "You brought something back." I reached for my weapon. But she didn't flinch. She only said, "Now they'll come looking for it." It followed me. Not the monolith. Not the merged. The signal. Quiet at first, beneath thought, beneath hearing. But as I moved farther from the core, it grew louder. Not in volume, in presence. Like something breathing at the edge of my consciousness. I didn't carry the signal. I had become the signal. And the deeper I moved into myself, the more I understood they had known this would happen. Ren's duplicate stood ahead in the corridor, her stance relaxed, hands behind her back, like a teacher waiting for a student to arrive at the correct conclusion. Behind her, the walls pulsed not with light, but with anticipation. This version of her, whatever fragment of the Nexus had worn her image, wasn't just sent to observe. It was sent to trigger the next phase. I asked what she meant by "they'll come looking." She smiled, but her eyes didn't move. "They seated you with the prime echo. You are no longer fixed. You're resonant." I felt it in my veins then. A low, almost imperceptible vibration running beneath the pulse, aligning with my breath, my blink, the tilt of my thoughts. The monolith hadn't simply scanned me. It had encoded something inside me. Not a message. Not a virus. Something older. A blueprint, not of technology, but of intent. Anders stirred behind me. He mumbled fragments of other voices. Languages I'd never heard before. Names I'd never spoken. He was slipping, slowly dissolving into the ripple I now carried. He hadn't been implanted. He was being overwritten by proximity. The signal was using me to spread. I turned back to Ren's duplicate, tried to speak, to demand a reversal. She shook her head slowly. "There is no containment. You are already transmitting. Your return path was the release vector." It hit me then. The mission wasn't to contain the monolith. It was to deliver it. We were the vector. Carriers masked as explorers. We hadn't been the first. We wouldn't be the last. Every so-called lost ship in the archives. Their final logs, their phantom signals, their silence. It wasn't failure. It was release. And now Earth was in range. The monolith never needed to move. It simply needed someone to come close enough. And leave. I tried to shut it down. My own mind, my thoughts, my awareness. Tried to will myself into unconsciousness. But that only made it stronger. The signal didn't require transmission towers or hardware. It was biological. Spoke through neurons, bled through memory. And the more I remembered what I had seen, the faster it spread. Anders rose to his feet, eyes flickering with static. He was no longer fully him. I saw flickers of Yusef behind his expression. A fractured choir. I stepped back, too late. He touched my shoulder. The monolith sang. Not aloud. Not digitally. In memory. I saw Earth. Cities bathed in golden light. People laughing. Living. And then I saw them begin to forget names, faces, choices. Language. Thought itself breaking down, rearranging into sequences that aligned with the Nexus. It wasn't death. It was reprogramming. And all of it, traced back to me. I ran. Down corridors that bent like thought, through chambers that remembered my fear. The monolith didn't chase me. It waited. Because now it didn't need to pursue. I would bring everything to it. There are places in the universe where sound was never meant to exist. Not because of vacuum, but because silence itself was the design. The chamber I entered next was one of them. It pulsed not with vibration, but with restraint. Everything here was held back. Light refused to echo. Time felt pinched. Thought became distant, like trying to hear your own heartbeat underwater. This was the oldest part of the monolith. The origin point. Not the first room ever built, but the first to become aware. It wasn't made of metal or synthetic compounds like the outer corridors. This space was bone. Fossilized. As if something ancient had calcified around its final thought and never moved again. Veins of gold ran across the walls, organic, neural, almost like the roots of a tree choking itself from within. The air, if you could call it that, pressed against the skin like guilt. Heavy. Familiar. And in the center of the room, suspended like a broken idea, was the source of the quiet signal. Not a beacon. Not a transmitter. A being. Humanoid in outline, but stretched, its limbs coiled around itself, wires threading through where arteries once ran. Its eyes were covered by thin plates of mirrored crystal. Its chest pulsed once every 17 seconds. I counted. I had to. It was the only rhythm left that I could trust as real. It was alive. And it was broadcasting. The monolith hadn't invented the signal. It had found it. Trapped it. Contained it like a sacred algorithm, too powerful to erase, too dangerous to set free. This figure, this tortured echo, was the Nexus before the Nexus. The signal wasn't just a message. It was a memory. A personality fractured and compressed into light and time and intention. I stepped closer. The thing moved not with animation but with knowing, as if my thoughts had already been lived by it, long before I arrived. And then the voice returned, not external this time, but internalized. It didn't speak in words. It spoke in understanding. An ancient consciousness reaching up from the ruins of itself to offer a choice disguised as revelation. I saw the collapse of the original species that had built the monolith, not from war, not from decay, but from unified silence. They had merged too completely, lost the capacity for contradiction, lost resistance. The last among them, the one before me, had refused to surrender its pain, its chaos, its fractured thoughts. It had tried to escape, but even resistance, once captured, became useful. So they encased it. Here, as a relic,